Okay, welcome back, everybody. Our next invited talk is by Josh Rubin from University of Michigan, and he's going to be sharing with us a very, very important, but also kind of sad and tragic story that I hope we all can learn from.
We'll
So,
try to learn and we'll
Josh,
try to find happy endings or
yes,
inspired actions in ways we can take the theme of this conference, which is, if people can talk, if people can share their voices and talk to one another civilly, we can prevent these problems, we can solve these problems, we can work together on them. So I think this is a great conference. Actually, on that note, I'll really thank you for the opportunity, and it's really humbling to be in the presence of the different guardians we've heard from today, of truth and integrity. And Carl, I want to thank you for putting this together, and not only for inviting me, but for yourself being a model of perseverance and courage.
well,
You may be a David and a David Goliath struggler yourself, but you're really a testament to what happens when David just won't give up. So, um, a little about me: I'm a lawyer by training. I also have an MBA, a master's in public health, a master's in public policy, all health focused. I'm a clinical assistant professor at the University of Michigan Medical School. I'm a social entrepreneur, and I'm an advocate for and with people who are tired of being at the receiving end of abuses of power. What I am not in any way is really a natural storyteller or much of a public speaker, but I appreciate this opportunity to try. I really thought this had to be done without slides as a narrative. I tend to use way too many slides. With that said, I've been scrambling to redo this talk the past couple hours, especially in light of insights from Maggie earlier on the topic of trying to leave the thread of listening, and communicating throughout it, and Natalie said about equity, and what Flip said. So I've been trying to actually redo it quickly. I hope this still makes sense. Like I said, I'm faculty at the University of Michigan Medical School Department of Learning Health Sciences. I helped envision and stand up. I'm also the executive director of the Joseph Cantor Family Foundation, which is dedicated to advancing this idea of learning health systems, really from a patient perspective. I'm the pro bono founding president and CEO of a nonprofit called the Learning Health Community. Becky Cush is joining us from that. Um, I helped co-found a mental health learning health system nonprofit called Singula. So I'm really into this learning health system stuff, and I actually think it is a big piece of the solution to what we're talking about today. I've also volunteered with a nonprofit called Promoting Awareness of Victim Empowerment that helps survivors of sexual assault. I've been volunteering there with PAVE, it's called, for the past 19 years. I've been president of the board for the past 7. I never expected that to intersect with anything else, but sadly it really has. But I represent myself, not these organizations today. And with that said, well, if I do say something smart, it's probably because of some of the other really smart people I get to work with. But anything dumb I say is pretty much on me. Sort of the themes I'm hoping to take away from this, these sort of several stories that I'm hoping to converge is: one is something you hear at the airport or on the subway. If you see something, say something. When something's wrong, someone should say something. Someone should do something. And well, guess what? I'm somebody, and so are each and every one of you. I'm going to talk a little about different big problems in institutions. Um, Sexual predation, anti-Semitism, racism, stifling free speech, mistreatment of patients and students, and some lower level employees, and what flips it about moral corruption. These are all can be seen as the sort of the same monster, surreptitiously wearing very different masks, and they're all sort of nourished by the same fruits of the poisonous tree of abuses of power and anti-learning systems. Also, another point is, everyone going through this stuff could use an ally and a friend. That sunlight's the best disinfectant for all this stuff, and every one of us has talents, and we've seen that in different people's talents today, including fighting fires, literally one of our speakers. And if we should use what we know how to do to make a difference when we see these things. Um, my teaser, sort of that in the past year or so, um, not great. I'm not giving career advice here, but I've allied and advocated for and with survivors who sued my employer for $500 million, or settled with my employer for $500 million. I've challenged institutional orthodoxy at the university I work for and peer universities. I've briefed Congress on the need for systemic learning, and I may have inadvertently played a role in getting the president of our university called before Congress. And then I went up to meet him right before his testimony. Again, this is not great career advice, but this is part and I've worked with collaborators to try to fuse system sciences and learning health sciences to try to create a new discipline to help address some of these challenges, and I also somehow got a long overdue promotion in the middle of all this. So, on the topic of this new field, I'll acknowledge that Carl was the first to submit a paper to a mini track that I see Melissa and Becky on this call and I helped organize, and the first to get accepted, and that's convening and trying to help build this track. So congratulations and thank you, Carl, for submitting to it, because it's helped reinforce the idea that there's a there. What I actually do for a living is work on this stuff called learning health systems. I got into it when I met a philanthropist named Joe Cantor. He's a guy that the topic of some privileged, some not privileged, grew up in a very, very poor family, lived through the Great Depression, fought in World War II, and then had a sort of a self-made entrepreneurial rise to success in fields that he knew nothing about, but he was knighted for the way he gathered intelligence on the battlefield. And he started building veterans housing, and again found the smartest people in that field and asked them what to do, and learned a lot from them. And banking, making movies that got nominated for Academy Awards, and all kinds of other interesting stuff, all by learning from other people. And was very surprised that healthcare didn't work that way when he was sick. He wanted to be able to learn from the experiences of other patients like him, and was shocked that healthcare didn't do this systematically. And when he had the resources, created a foundation to change that. In my role running his foundation, some of the ways to help build this idea of a learning health system, first thing was we brought lots of different stakeholders together and tried to agree on what the core values were. Again, Becky, who's in the audience, helped with every step of this. What are the core values? And that bonds together people, that keeps the learning health system focused on being a good one that has positive things for society. And it gave rise to this nonprofit called the Learning Health Community. Also realized there's a scientific component of it, and that we actually held other workshops where we figured out what all the scientific and engineering challenges were. Sort of an analogy that they invented steam engines before they invented thermodynamics, but once they invented thermodynamics, you can get the steam engines to stop exploding and really do good things with them. So we want to develop this science for this, and that's really what I do at University of Michigan now. You're going to hear me criticize Michigan and criticize other universities, but again, we helped build this department at the University of Michigan called the Department of Learning Health Sciences. We started a journal of this field based there. We've done all kinds of other great work there. And in general, this school is one of the greatest public research universities. And I went to work there because it's really a model of collaboration and strengthen different disciplines to make something like this complicated transdisciplinary science possible. In my own life, I've had the privilege of, again, I got 4 degrees at Georgetown. I studied at Johns Hopkins as well. I've taken courses at Columbia and Oxford. And I say this because Michigan can actually do things those schools can't. And I want to get this good stuff in early, because what I'm going to be offering criticism later is constructive. It is to get back to the place that was the birthplace of the Peace Corps, that helped build a cornerstone of the internet, that underpinned the research that made Salk's polio vaccine possible, and so many other great things. Also, our football team had an amazing year. So I just wanted to get that in there, and I'm really focused on the potential. Also, both of my parents grew up where, because they got to go to great public universities in New York, it allowed them to radically change their lives and made a lot of my life possible. So first warning about this stuff for me came when I sort of, on my own dime, I flew out to this conference in California, and there were heads of foundations and other really important people speaking. And I asked them really tough questions, and the heads of one of these foundations that had like $1 billion or more in assets talked to me afterwards and was really excited. And he actually would later, we had a couple of conversations, he would later fly to the University of Michigan to meet with me and a few people in my department to really talk about doing some big funding of an initiative. So this was something really big I put together, I want to say around 2016. And one of the people I had was also had a joint appointment. I'm at the medical school, but had a joint appointment with the School of Public Health. And for reasons I didn't understand, when this meeting got arranged with this head of a really big foundation, the dean of the School of Public Health shows up at the meeting, and he's a part of it, and something doesn't make sense. And I had this feeling, and afterwards, everything ends. And I had a feeling that it was sabotage. And anyone I talked to, when I asked them about it, told me not to do anything, not to act. I eventually internalized that it was my fault. I had failed to understand some aspect of organizational politics. I blame myself. I didn't do anything. Well, fast forward, this guy becomes the provost, and had a series of promotions. As provost, he was sort of a serial sexual harasser and maybe somewhat of a sexual predator. So the second highest administrator, this is a quote from USA Today, the second highest administrator at the University of Michigan had a lengthy history of sexually harassing female employees and sexual relationships, including in university offices in his office, while being promoted time and time again. They settled for almost $10 million. And I've always wondered, like, why didn't I do more? What if I hadn't convinced myself? Could I have prevented what he did? He did all this many years later as provost, and if I had said something, done something, would that have changed things? And again, an interesting potential enabler in this. I read a book later about focused a lot on what happened across the state from us at Michigan State called Armies of Enablers. And the title of that book is really important because the author said, I think it was going to be called Army of Bystanders. And the two big changes were changing bystanders to enablers and changing army singular to armies plural. Because everywhere you turn, there is an army. And when you were really trying to fight this institutional stuff, these armies of enablers are everywhere. And even one more enabler seems to be that this $10 million settlement and this whole thing was investigated by this law firm, not based in Michigan, but based in Washington, D.C., called Wilmer Hale. And I just find it interesting. We're like a repeat customer of them. You're going to hear about a couple of scandals. They always get the business to the tune of millions of dollars of doing a so-called independent investigation, which I think, on the topic of another kind of bias, is heavily biased towards making things not look as bad as they are. Fast forward to January 22, the president of our university now, not the provost, the president is terminated because he had his own sex scandal, and he violated a policy he publicly proclaimed. That was so ridiculous it even involved Knishes. And we heard even more about a really big scandal, which was a doctor who saw students, and mostly student athletes, named Robert Anderson, who over many years raped over 1,000 mostly student patients of his. I guess I will. Let's see. I'm seeing how I'm doing on time. I had planned to read. This is sort of an example of the activism I jumped into. Was I wrote a bunch of internal emails, and then finally really tried to get meetings together. And then I wrote a larger email where the subject line, this is in February of 2022, UM is not exceptional but has exceptional people, and Dr. Sissel, the president, can Knish my ASCH. Knish. Again, he had an obsession with Knishes. That was the inside joke that I don't explain. Colleagues, thank all of you who've been so actively engaged this past week and for many weeks, months, and even prior years, intuitively recognizing that something's wrong at our university and endeavoring to say something about it and do something about it. The past week or so, I convened an unmeeting, listened and spoke at 4 presidential search listening sessions, actively reached out and spoke to anyone who might listen, and listened to the myriad people who reached out to me. Many of you have listened, made your voices heard, and took action as well. I wanted to share a few thoughts at the end of a highly emotional week in Michigan, appropriately marked by a mix of unseasonably warm sunny days and frigid snowy days shrouded in dark gray skies. Part A, UM is not exceptional. One of the regions of UM began each of the presidential search sessions by stating, this is an exceptional institution demanding an exceptional leader, as well as enumerating a list of measures by which we're deemed an exceptional public research university. As I stated directly at one of them, any organization whose leadership allows over 1,000 people to be sexually abused should strongly consider holding off calling itself exceptional. UM is not exceptional. 2, a courageous and articulate UM alumnus who's a survivor of horrific abuse at the hands of a professor spoke out at one presidential search session. She scoured UM leadership for a lack of transparency and putting some of the very people who allowed the problem to happen in charge of ostensibly fixing the problem. Calling attention to the scale and scope of abuse, she also stated, I'm not confident in the Board of Regents and in this committee until you include survivors on the committee, and I don't see any reason why you should have a shortage of them because there are thousands of us. 3, someone who has worn multiple hats at UM wrote to me, I observed instances of bullying and abusive behavior over the years and recently experienced myself. What became clear in every instance is there's no real protection or recourse from those that are being bullied and or abused because the abusers bring in money, recognition, and rankings. Their behavior is tolerated and even supported. Many of those perpetrating the abuse have done so for many years, are well-funded, and their behavior is common knowledge across campus. 4, a senior university-wide leader met with me. Her family has lived in the state of Michigan for decades. She's also a mother of a son who's an undergraduate here. Her daughter's finishing up high school soon. She will not let her daughter apply to UM, even though tuition would be free for her, because she does not consider UM campus to be safe for young women. UM is not exceptional. 5, UM's basketball hosts publicly engaged in violence and not enough has been done. 6, A prospective donor to UM spoke with me. They're no longer a prospective donor, and I understand why. 7. A longtime staff member described filling out dozens of surveys over several decades. Among other things, the respondents consistently endeavored to shine a light on the culture of fear that pervades the university. Absurdly, the most prominent and visible change implemented was a staff picnic. Even more absurdly, today on campus, we cannot use the word picnic and cannot have an open discussion in which actually diverse perspectives are freely shared vis-a-vis arguments for and against banning such words. 8. Earlier this year, I wrote, the Regent's termination of Dr. Schlissel the president, chastises him for the evidence chasm between his lofty words and reprehensible actions, pulling the lens back where questioning is quashed, where diversity of thought is stifled, where power trumps compassion, where trite virtue signaling is seen as holier than actually making a difference, and where faculty and staff and even learners are routinely gaslighted into seeing opacity as transparency, such chasms grow largely out of sight. In contrast, when principles in our consensus core values for learning health systems are operationalized in socio-technical infrastructures and cultures anchored in learning, the radiant sunlight of truth indeed becomes the best disinfectant. This sentiment has resonated with diverse faculty, staff, and learners with whom I shared it. 9. UM's The University Record, which bills itself as news for faculty, staff, and retirees, had essentially no interest in covering any of the aforementioned perspectives. 10. So many utterly amazing people with whom I spoke describe a culture where UM leadership crushes their spirits, where great achievements happen in spite of and not because of the organizational hierarchy at UM, where too often those in power exude little empathy and those with empathy yield little power, where injustice is the norm, where those charged with listening or caring do not seem to do so, where much talk is met by little action and even less positive change, where fear looms large, where truly exceptional people are routinely disempowered by navel-gazing dilettantes, and where hopelessness pervades. I go on and say that we are filled with exceptional people. That's where our hope lies. Our greatest hope for transformation lies in the utterly exceptional people we routinely bring into our orbit. The faculty, staff, and learners I work with across campus are amazing in more ways than I can count. I'm personally beyond grateful to know all of you, inspired. As cliche as it may sound, we need to be the change. That's our collective calling. And then I talk about the president. Those who benefit from the status quo, including our literal emperor with no clothes but tons of knishes, who leave us fearful and disempowered more than we may consciously realize. They endeavor to gaslight us into believing we are alone in questioning. The termination of the president last month is so much bigger than a leader who betrayed his spouse and his employer. It's an entire organization betraying its learners and its employees by forsaking its ideals and reneging on its moral and ethical commitments to society, and perhaps cowardly hiding from these truths in a bubble of self-delusion. As I wrote earlier this year, let us not forget that in the latter half of 2020, in the face of a vote of no confidence by the faculty senate and protests, these very regents rightfully excoriating him. Nevertheless, at the time, the regents wrote, our board supports the president and the administration as we continue to lead our university through tremendous challenges, blah, blah, blah. Ironically, as clear as the clarion call for change may be, there are still those in power surreptitiously driving a culture marked by fear and silence. As a consequence, too many of us are gaslighted into believing that we stand alone. We do not. This is where I get to the Ash part. Well over half a century ago, Dr. Solomon Asch researched the cognitive, emotional, and behavioral effects on individuals of pressure to conform. His famed social psychology studies, known colloquially as the Asch conformity experiments, illuminated the power of the perceived social pressure of groups to drive individual conformity and submission. Variations on these experiments also revealed the extraordinary potential of an individual to stand up when they realize they do not stand alone. One of Dr. Asch's most highly cited publications is titled Studies of Independence and Conformity, a Minority of One Against a Unanimous Majority. These studies by Dr. Asch guide us on a path forward. We need not submit and we need not conform. Bringing about urgently needed transformation starts by facing hard truth, parenthesis, UM is not exceptional, and by recognizing those of us intuitively sensing that if something is profoundly wrong and needs to change, do not stand alone, regardless of how isolated and disempowered those in power may endeavor to make us feel. There are so many uniquely exceptional and exceptionally unique people here, as this department proves. We may not agree on everything, and such actual diversity of perspectives openly shared is a really wonderful thing, but we stand together and we are there for one another. Together we have the power to realize urgently needed change. To the President Schlissel and his enablers that would want for us to stay quiet and remain passive, I have this to say. Dr. Schlissel can condition my ash. Thank you and go blue. So let's see, that's where I was. After sharing this email, I was told I'm never allowed to put the word gaslighting in writing again. just going to continue. Let's see. I don't want to take too much time, but I'll continue on this theme. Um, Another thing that happened that very year of all weird coincidences, my parents had been living in Florida, but decided to move back to the little town in upstate New York that I grew up in, um, and had not been there in well over a decade. Hadn't really been paying attention to what was going on since I had graduated from high school about a quarter century prior. But decided to Google the school, and anyway, I was just really this gets back to what Flip talked about with moral corruption. I found that indeed, in spite of the fact I was valedictorian and I actually used that speech to talk to my classmates in advance and find out what their biggest sort of pet peeves were and try to make a comical ending to the speech, telling the school kind of what they could work on after a very rough year. Um, Nothing had changed. And in fact, the same kind of things were happening. There was an incident where some special needs students had been abused, and the school, instead of doing the right thing, again, everyone I knew was gone. I graduated a quarter century ago, but instead of doing the right thing, these all new people in power did the same thing they had done 25, 30 years earlier, which was cover it up, cover it up stupidly so they mess up the cover up, then cover up the messed up cover up, then mess up the cover up of the messed up cover up, and on and on and on. And nothing is, and I think that's one of these characteristics of a non-learning system is you can change all the people and the same problems persist. But I guess this time I was actually able, I reached out to the most visible mother of one of these special needs students, and we worked together and, hopefully got some temporary results, but I don't know if it's going to change the culture. Um, Going back, that really gave me insight into this idea that there's something about these systems. And again, if totally different people can repeat the same behavior, something is odd in the system, and you need a system solution that will get to what we work on later. Um, so let's see. Back to Michigan, I started to notice even retroactively abuses of power across other dimensions. You know, and again, it just reiterated the idea to me that when I see something, or when anyone sees something, they should say something, or at least ask questions or try to understand. I also noticed kind of, for lack of a better expression, what I'm calling a Seinfeld rule, which is people in power almost tragically, comically, are like the opposite of what they hold themselves out to be. That this president who was concerned about abuses in hierarchical relationships was fired for an abuse in the hierarchical relationship of a rule he created. People most concerned with stamping out privilege get their jobs due to nepotism, and on and on and on. I have like many examples of this. Um, Other speakers today talk about racism, disparities, equity. Um, One is, well, actually, I'll get to that later. One point I have is, I've seen efforts aimed at this stuff sort of used in kind of bizarre ways. Like I saw in COVID at the very beginning, they wanted to give different vaccines to different people, kind of based on race and where you were likely to live and socioeconomic status. Or they wanted to give the people in Detroit the Johnson and Johnson vaccine. They wanted to give people that lived in Ann Arbor, where the university was, the Pfizer. They had all kinds of justifications for this, but to me, I tried to raise the differing viewpoint, which was that there should be, but they used some equity language in it, and I think it was sort of upside down. Like they basically tried to argue that people that lived in Detroit wouldn't be able to come back and get a second vaccine, and I just tried to argue that we should, let people decide what they want in their body and educate them as much as we can with the limited knowledge we had at the time. But what I found was an echo chamber. Again, what Natalie just said just an hour ago was equity and empowerment really looming large here. We've had, I mean, we had a mental health training where they, again, anchored in some of this language, they tried to explain to us that it is racist for us to expect Black, Indigenous, or people of color, BIPOC students to be on time for things because they can't be on time because they've been so oppressed. And if we expect them to be on time, that is racism on our part. And my feeling is if someone, I sort of raised the point that if someone's not on time once or twice, I don't care. If they're repeatedly not on time and it's interrupting, I'll talk to them about it and see if there's a way I can help them. And for raising that, I was really shot down. And again, that viewpoint was not welcome. I'm not getting to which one is right or wrong. I'm getting to sort of what I saw as the abuse of power and not allowing different opinions. We were mocked nationally by comedians because we hosted some whites only and people of color only events. And we actually made national sort of comedy mocking of some of that. And I saw just other abuses, again, where interestingly, right in the power structures, they say they're doing something about racism, but it ends up giving more power to the deans and the people at the very top. And they really do a lot that wasn't allowed. And again, to me anyway, some of this felt Orwellian. The way they measured things was very interesting, where they would do things and they would give surveys out that you can only rate things kind of, like good, great, or excellent, but you can't say there's any problem with the thing. And it makes it very hard to measure. And I just think, there were a lot of issues here, and there's some power issues built right into this. What I really found was I tried, very politely to ask questions about this, to raise different viewpoints, and to reach out to people. And I felt I was even um, gaslighted by some of the people I reached out to. I think I'll skip some of this. I'll just give uh, a few metrics. Is this, for a university that is often ranked as the number one public research university, often ranked number two as a recipient of grants, spends the most on diversity, equity, and inclusion, but has terrible outcomes on this kind of stuff. Um, by some measures, we're also the most dangerous campus in America. I found one study, and it's hard to get good statistics on this, so I admit some of these might be off, but it was the best I could find. One study, we were the number one campus in the most absolute number of violent crimes, and number three if you take that per capita. Our sexual assault statistics are on the rise, and in fact, I'll get into the biggest thing I've had a problem with of anything was we enabled, for lack of a better expression, what might be the number one largest mass sexual assault in U.S. history. And again, we have these other high-profile scandals. I mentioned the president, the provost abusing their power, and we're not learning, and we're really in trouble on this stuff. This what I'm referring to as this mass sexual assault. Again, after the president was removed for his sex scandal, the provost was removed for his serial sexual predation. Really, the news of the biggest thing broke. The hero of the story is someone named John Vaughn. He played football for the University of Michigan, played professionally in the NFL. He's a survivor of this abuse of power, and he actually camped out in front of in a tent that he set up in front of the president's house for 150 days, simply asking to be heard as a survivor. He happens to be African American. Did I hear something? Sorry, saying on Zoom. Sorry. He happens to be an African American man who's really persevered through a very challenging childhood, and in fact, his race, his gender, and his lower socioeconomic status when he was a student were really used against him to make him one of the 1,000+ targets. It turns out over a course of decades, this doctor who was put in charge of university health services for students, and from what I understand, moved towards just athletes as there were potential problems instead of like really investigating. So he was really in charge of the student athletes, again, who tended to be people, who were in positions where they might not be able to speak up, going to what Natalie talked about. He raped or molested over 1,000 patients, mostly students like John. There were many people, sort of staff levels. I've talked to people who worked here for 40 years and on, who say they knew pieces of it. They saw pieces of the elephant, but they were either disempowered or they were only able to see pieces, so they couldn't put the whole picture together. Regardless, it didn't happen. Again, this goes to what I said about armies of enablers. Everywhere someone turned who had a concern was one enabler or another enabler who blocked everything. John, as a survivor, became the most visible face of this largest mass sexual assault. He wanted to have his voice heard. Those in power really wouldn't listen. And in addition to being highly visible in his tent in front of the president's house, he was visible on Dr. Phil, on CNN, on ESPN, and all kinds of other media. I learned from Carl this term DARVO: deny, attack, reverse, victim, and offender, and this seems to be a theme on all of these. That the person the person getting bullied is labeled as the bad guy. In this case, John, who was legally camped out, had after everything else he'd been through, and while he was going through medical treatments, had his tent that was camped on the city sidewalk, as I understood it, had the university police called on him by the leadership and pushed away. And again, he's the good guy, and he was made the RVO, reverse victim and offender. I mentioned earlier that I volunteer at this national nonprofit called PAVE, promoting women's victim empowerment, and I've been president of the board for 7 years. We've done some pretty cool advocacy. Pamela Anderson reached out to us to help us collaborate on improving rideshare, like Uber safety. Bill Cosby survivors reached out to us, and we've been lauded for what we've done to be there for them and support them. And by sheer coincidence, not knowing that the president of the board has a connection to the University of Michigan, John and other survivors reached out to PAVE and ultimately connected with me after talking with the amazing founder and executive director, Angela Rose. I thought about whether I had a conflict of interest. We didn't stand to gain anything financially, and we sure didn't. But you know, what I think I heard, and this goes back to learning systems, what John and the other survivors wanted the most, and what victims of some of these other things I mentioned want most, is for the system to learn so it doesn't happen to anyone else in the future. Um, and I said, hey, my job is about learning systems. So in fact, not only did I not have a conflict, this is what I'm supposed to be doing, is helping this university learn, whether it's about delivering more precision medicine cancer care, or if it's not harming its patients, not harming its students. So to me, there's no conflict. This is just what I'm supposed to do, is help people. Um, and to be a great university, like I said, we have to be a place where everyone is physically safe and everyone can learn. And if that requires the organization learning, so be it. Um, this is not a University of Michigan problem alone. Actually, nothing I did is we've had talks earlier in this recorded meeting about issues of this stuff at many other very prestigious universities. This kind of thing, even this mass rape, has happened at UCLA, Penn State, Michigan State, Colorado, Ohio State, and others. Incredibly, several of these schools actually, including University of Michigan, filed amicus briefs to support Ohio State in basically its efforts to make it more challenging for survivors to come forward. So somehow they can rival each other in football, but they come together to defend the rights of one school to make it harder for the listening that we began this conversation with, to make it harder to listen. Anyway, I contacted and I reached out to other survivors of these universities. I did a lot of listening and a lot of learning. And I realized we needed to mobilize something, or needed to do something to mobilize universities and academic medical centers to, again, embrace this approach to learning. We talked about, well, can you get the donors to stop? And I'll tell you, we had one donor separately. There was one donor that was lined up to give to Michigan and heard about all this stuff that broke at the news around the same time. And she told me, and then told the development people, she's not going to give. And that was probably a bequeathment of several $1,000,000. And it didn't phase them at all. It didn't change anything. They have an $18 billion endowment. But I got to thinking the thing that does affect them is that these schools really are dependent on federal grants. And that's possibly a level. So 4 things that occurred to me to do. One is keep doing these internal questions and really ask people respectfully and try to get through to people and try to have voices heard, but that hadn't had much luck. Second is find opportunities for survivors to speak. I so finally remember John and I, the first time we spoke together was at a high school in the Washington, D.C. area where the students organized an event all about this stuff, and it was amazing to watch. And then, get the voices of survivors heard in Congress. So I reached out. I had, in my past life, I had interned for Senator Ted Kennedy. I'd done fundraising for the Clinton. I'm now dating myself on age, but what was I going to say? I reached out to a Democrat on this bipartisan committee around sexual violence and managed successfully to at least get the survivors to be heard. And finally make an ask to think about a lot of the people on that committee also do stuff on funding and NIH, and make an ask that we change how funding is done so that you can't give NIH grants to places that are doing this kind of stuff, or have the NIH put some kind of pressure on the universities to learn before they can get more grants. Even change the overhead rates. It doesn't have to be all or nothing, but that was the big ask that we were trying to get them to consider. So mostly, again, these were survivors from these universities speaking, and it was pretty amazing to watch them tell their stories. And I think the most important thing was just them feeling empowered to be listened to, which came back to where we started. They were empowered and they were listened to. And I know this was appreciated. I want to see something else I want to read you is, more recently, John was interviewed on a podcast, and he was asked spontaneously to talk about me. And this is something I will just always treasure. So this is something that John said spontaneously. He hadn't prepared it, but he's someone I think is a hero of mine. He says, we met Josh as the president of a nonprofit called PAVE, promoting awareness of victim empowerment. I was introduced to Angela Rose, who's the founder and executive director of PAVE. And then I got involved in that organization. I met Josh, who ironically works at the University of Michigan in the medical department on the business side of the University of Michigan. And knowing his background, Josh is probably one of the most intelligent, smartest, nicest, kind-hearted people I've ever met in my life, who doesn't have a lot of words, because I stay out of the way, let the survivors get to talk. But the words he says are so meaningful. And then Anthony takes a survivor, as a non-survivor of sexual assault, but as an individual who stands up for us, He's like the guy who, I was watching the medieval stuff the other day, and this tribe is going to war, right? And they're passing through the village. And Josh was the guy who's like, hold on, let me get my spear. I'm coming with you, and we're going to fight the people who are the oppressors, right? That's like Josh. I'm willing to speak up publicly about what happened at Michigan and these other institutions to the point where, he has people within institutions, but individuals of power within institutions all around the world starting to talk about this. That is Josh. And that is, one of the most meaningful things to me. So let's see, I'm trying to keep track of time. Um, so in my past on this learning health system stuff, I've had luck bringing together smart, passionate, diverse stakeholders to come up with this set of core values that we share, and later this research agenda that help give rise to this new science, this basic science department where I'm lucky enough to work at a major university, a peer-reviewed journal, a nonprofit organization, and so much more. And I guess I just wanted to see if any of that model might work to catalyze something in this space. So I wanted to see, actually starting with taking the principles, the core values of transparency, cooperative leadership, scientific integrity, and all these really good principles that would very much align with everything we've talked about at Guardians. Start with the principles and sort of that model and see if we can move forward with maybe an academic discipline or something that gets academics talking about this in academia. And indeed, I came to see the systems we were trying to fight as actually anti-learning systems that were subverting those very values. So I thought of a quote widely attributed to Deming that every system is perfectly designed to receive the result that it achieves. And I guess that's true even when the results are these really bad things like mass sexual predation. As a starting point, I wanted to see anyone would ever listen to an academic talk on this topic, and whether it would even get through like a quasi peer review kind of process and what might come of it. So I remember this really preeminent global conference annually called the HICS, Hawaii International Conference of System Science, every January in Hawaii, bring these system scientists from around the world together. And I applied, and I ultimately gave 2 talks on the topic in January of 2023 in Lahaina, Maui. At the 11th hour, I changed one title of one of the talks to include the term empowering Davids to outmaneuver systems of Goliath. And outmaneuver would prove to be sort of a Prussian keyword. Dr. Melissa Osipek, who's right on this call with us, she's a professor at University of Illinois Champaign-Urbana's Information School. Her enthusiastic reaction and all the great ideas she had just made me want to work with her going forward because she's amazing. She said this was one of the most important talks she ever heard at any academic conference, and said we just have to get this thing talked about everywhere in academia, and every conference, every place we go. And so she became my partner in disruption on this stuff. And people in industry, academia, graduate students, scientists, faculty, entrepreneurs at that conference that were there from Europe, from Asia, and Australia, they were all moved and excited, but they also all had similar experiences from around the world. This isn't even just an American thing. This is like a truly global thing. So the logical follow-up was we proposed a symposium at the following year's conference. That was going to be convened in Honolulu. And I really worked hard on that proposal, and it got through. It was a very detailed proposal, and it got through. That was going to be the next January. Interestingly, of course, spring of 2023, I did this unrelated consulting project where I looked at health and social services outcomes in all 50 states against measures of sort of state-level IT investments and expenditures. And Hawaii was such an outlier. And actually, all I say is it led me to a hypothesis. Again, this goes right into what Flip was talking about with moral corruption. It was such an outlier and spent so much money. I don't know what the beep was. So it was really intriguing. And of all things, then of course you can fast forward August 2023, and tragically, on the topic of fires, you have the wildfire in Lahaina. And in addition to the fire itself and the tragedy of events leading up to it, some of the response, again, you survived if you were a David who outmaneuvered a system of Goliaths there. And it just, the sheer tragedy of it, the series of events around it, the equity issues, the possible, again, what Flip just termed moral corruption earlier, and people in power, it was very interesting. And I say this, thanking every firefighter and everyone who's there. My mother happens to be a volunteer EMT, so I very much appreciate people who do that kind of work, and like Flip does. And but it just, that event in Lahaina, right where we were giving this talk about David's outmaneuvering Goliaths, moving systems and Goliaths, made me think we got to just redouble our commitment to this. And we expanded the scope of the workshop, and I put more of my own resources in. I brought Melissa, who's a partner, and Becky Cush was here as a partner. John Vaughn, I mentioned, was part of it. And we really, Casey Sikora, who I think might be here as part of it. And then we invited these amazing speakers. Thanks to suggestions and connections of Melissa, we got to bring in an amazing MacArthur Genius Fellow and all kinds of other extraordinary people. And we built this standing room only workshop that we promoted like crazy. And, it was just one of the talks of that conference. And it kept getting bigger and bigger as every break, more people dragged their friends from other meetings in, and it got kept. So that was really a proof that there's a there, that we can get people to talk about it and people interested and people excited from all over the world that are preeminent people. And that led to what we're doing next January, which is this mini track where we're trying to get scholars now to take their time to write about it and do research on it and try to get their research published and try to get the research peer reviewed. And again, I just will acknowledge Carl as our very first submitter to this, which is proof, and he got through the peer review process, and that's just sort of proof that this is something there. There may be a field, there may be something coming out of this. So, and we started with these talks. It started with getting peer reviewed and accepted talks. We built momentum with this sort of academic star-studded workshop, and now it's showing the emergence of people willing to research and write about it. And I think that's definitely the beginning of something, and I'm excited about what comes next. And I would, if we have time for discussion, I'd love some advice. So, final issue I wanted to talk about that I think connects with all this, and this is, we've had a few interludes about what's going on college campuses, but this whole issue about anti-Semitism, free speech, civil discussion of what's going on in Israel and Palestine, and that did not happen on our campus, to say the least. I am running tight on time, so I'm not going to get into too many details, but I will say, I mentioned I run this foundation. My late boss, who's a World War II veteran, self-made social entrepreneur, sort of an embodiment of moral courage and an all-around hero, Joe Cantor. He'd been honored in many Jewish communities about a decade back. And so I reached out to some of these organizations and explored ways that I could talk about, again, the issues around free speech on that, the issues around just all these pieces of the puzzle, and connected. Again, this is the same monster wearing different masks. So connected with the mass sexual assaults that happen, connected with all these other problems that are not moving forward and not learning because these are sort of anti-learning systems. So, whereas previously I'd sort of helped get John and some other survivors in front of Congress, this time I got a chance to talk, and I got a chance to brief people in Congress. Actually, I got a number of chances to brief people. First time I got to do this in the building called the Gerald Ford Congressional Office Building, and that's interesting because Gerald Ford happens to be a University of Michigan alumni, and one of the stories about him and he played football at Michigan, and one of the stories told about him at his funeral was how this was he was playing football for Michigan in the 1930s, and this is when, although Michigan had black players, racist Southern teams would insist that the Northern teams bench their black players when they played together. And I began the story about this, about how Ford actually, whatever you think of his politics, courageously he refused to play in a big game against a Southern team that was requiring the black players to be benched. And that story was mentioned at his funeral. And the reason I bring that up is, one is it's the importance of calling out something that's wrong when you see it's wrong. But second, it's really valuable to Michigan's story that this was called out internally, that they can say someone they selected as a student who happened to go on to be president of the United States, but someone they selected as a student had the courage to do this, and had the courage to do the right thing. It is much better to call it out internally than it is to wait till some external mechanisms find you. It's much more heroic for your own organization. I'll just bring that up again about if you see something, say something. In the long run, you're doing your organization a favor. I want to get back on time. Anyway, I also decided that I would, in this list of things, like the way the presidents of Harvard and MIT and Penn were called, the president of Michigan was called, and I knew what day he was coming and what time he was coming. And I decided, I had sent him internal emails, he hadn't listened. John Vaughn had the tent in front of the president's house, he hadn't listened. I decided I was going to try to find him before his testimony, and I wanted to tell him basically what I sort of been talking about now, is that you should openly acknowledge the real problems we're having and talk about committing to embracing these learning approaches to doing something about them, taking system science, taking learning science, and reminding him we have the strength on campus in that department and elsewhere, and we should be doing this. So interestingly, I got there right when the doors opened publicly, but he and the lawyers and the government relations people were already in a already sort of in a room, and I didn't think I would get to see them. And then, amazingly, about an hour and a half before his testimony, there was this actually there was a tornado warning, and the tornado warning caused everyone to go from wherever they were to stairwells and other places to be safe while the tornado warning passed through. And then afterwards, they were all out, and so I managed to meet them, and I managed to meet some of the government relations people in front of the restroom of all places, and told them, I'm Josh, I'm a professor at the Department of Learning Health Sciences at the medical school, and I'd love to meet with the president. And I got the opportunity to meet with him before his testimony and to tell him exactly that. So I'm going to skip the other stuff to get us a little back on track. But that was sort of a capstone of something pretty successful in terms of feeling like I had made a difference for the survivors, and what John said about me and recognized me. Just the fact that someone felt heard because of something I did was pretty incredible, and what a wonderful feeling. I got to get this idea in front of the president, and I got to help make with Melissa and Becky and and now Carl and other people here, maybe inventing some kind of a field to do something about it. So it's none of this is finished, but it's all off to a great start, and I think that's a really good note of hope to end on. And let me get my spear, and thank you so much for having me, and I look forward to this discussion.
Well, thank you, Josh. And let me put up your second slide.
Yeah, that's I use this slide in a lot of patient things because a lot of patients feel treated this way. So I said so I gotta go. I want to say
yeah, it's pretty funny. It's pretty
anyway.
funny.
A lot that resonates with a lot of patient empowerment things anyway. So
Yeah,
you said
I'm
you wanted
going
some
to.
slides before and after, so that's it.
I'm gonna. I'm gonna as MC or chair of this workshop. I'm gonna uh, use my privileged position to put two questions to you, and then
Sure. I'm gonna put my email address in the chat too for anyone who wants it.
yeah, my two questions are
My email address is in the chat for anyone who would like to reach me about any of this stuff. Okay, go ahead.
my two questions are in relation to this key story, this horrific sequence of events involving largest mass
Yeah,
sexual assault rape
yeah,
story at University of Michigan. So the two questions are one, there are so many events that you uh, mentioned, and
yeah.
it's a
I
long
hope
and
it wasn't
detailed,
overwhelming, but thank you.
a long and involved story, much of which probably can only be grasped by reading the written word in a written version of the story.
Okay.
But my question is, what do you, if you had to pick out one single turning point that you believed created the breakthrough, what was the turning point that created the breakthrough to resulting in, what ended up being a financial settlement of $500 million? So that's the first question on this mass sexual assault story. And then the second question, again on this same mass sexual assault story,
Yep.
how did you do what you did at University of Michigan without getting fired?
I got a promotion. That's my teaser at
How
the
did you
beginning.
do that without getting fired?
Well, and now this is recorded, so I don't know if this is going on the internet somewhere. I make it.
Well, if you want me to stop the
No,
recording,
no,
I'll
no,
stop
no,
the
no, no, no.
recording.
But it's the hour prior or whatever it was. The 40 minutes prior is now on the internet. No, I'm inspired to tell this story in a recorded thing because of what you've asked for, Carl. You want people who are guardians of turning points. I mean, again, Michigan had this again. I think if I want to get technical, I think it's the most accused. I don't think any other single person has been accused of 1,000 plus rapes of 1,000 plus people. I'm sorry, many thousands, multiple rapes of 1,000 plus people. So many, as this one doctor was. So I think that's probably the tech.
So
So I said,
you're suggesting that it was the sheer number in
no,
this
but
story that
no, but I
got
guess the
the
question in my mind
attention
is
that created the turning point?
why did it take decades is the question in my mind and what turned it. One I'll say that, I mean, the $500 million, it's a lot of money, but it actually, if you sort of do the math, that's to over 1,000 survivors. It's like, I think it's $490 million to over 1,000 survivors. There's probably lawyers getting a third. So then for what these people went through, I'll be amazed if they're walking away with 300,000. There's probably some taxes. So none of that's pocket change, but for what they went through, that might be way
It's
too
more about,
small.
I consider
Yeah, yeah,
the whole
yeah, yeah.
thing to be a successful outcome of
Exposing the truth. Yeah,
exposing the truth of bad boys behaving badly,
yeah,
not to limit
yeah,
it to
yeah. No,
just
yeah, and
boys,
then the president and the
but
provost and all these
bad
other bad
boys
boys.
behaving
Yeah.
badly. What was the key turning point, do you think, in finally getting traction on making something happen?
I think I'll give John a lot of credit for being in that tent over a winter. I mean, I think he started camping out in October. I said, I think he should get his. He's done a lot of brilliant things in his life. He should have started camping in a different month. You don't start in Michigan in October if you're going to be there for. And in fairness, he thought he'd be arrested in a matter of days. He thought it'd be over within days. He didn't think he'll be there for over the whole winter. But I think it's what. So I think it's back to the one piece of advice I gave is if you see something, say something. If you see something, say something. It was my letter about the ash experiment where everyone thinks they're alone. Actually, when people think they're alone, they'll conform to what they think is wrong, and as soon as they realize they have one ally, it changes the whole game. So I think it's the advice I gave at the beginning: be an ally, speak out, and I think it was this image of this former NFL player. He played for four different teams. I think the Patriots, the Pittsburgh Steelers, the Seattle Seahawks, and Kansas City. And I think he whatchamacallit. Melissa just put something in the chat too about she's giving her contact info too. Um,
Yeah.
but I think it's this image of this NFL player camped out in a tent in front of the president's house that finally got media attention, got Dr. Phil's, and a lot of other survivors did a lot of other things at Michigan. And I will say, John will attribute having the scandal broke at Michigan State about the U.S. Olympic gymnast coach about maybe 40 miles away from us. That had broken already, and this woman, Trinea Gonzar, who's one of the survivors of that, decided to become an ally to John, even well before he reached. And I think his friendship with her and what she did gave him the courage to go on, even while he was physically sick, while he was camping out in the middle of the winter. And I think that, plus all the other survivors, that just finally caught the media's attention. But it's
And the second question was,
how did I not get
why
fired?
weren't you walked out the door? Why weren't you fired? What did you do to prevent that from happening? Because typically whistleblowers or
Yeah,
people who get involved and become, movers and shakers in making something happen, typically they'll just get walked out the door and fired.
I've been told to shut up quite a few times. I've been told not to put stuff. I've been told not to put stuff in writing, not to bring stuff up at this meeting, not to bring stuff up at that meeting. I mean, it's a public university, so they'll say you have free speech rights, but it's not allowed here. It's not allowed there. You can't use this word. You can't use the word gaslight. You can't put this in writing. You can't email this. So they keep creating tighter and tighter boxes. I guess I'm allowed to sit and stare at myself, but um, I was pretty. I was, every time they told me what not to do, I was candid about. I said I'm gonna. I was candid about what I was doing. Like I went to people in Congress and I wrote letters to people at University of Michigan telling them I've been to talk to people in Congress. I was never doing anything behind anyone's back. Which might upset them, but they can't later say I did something. And I think I was right. And ironically, I think whenever I had the insight to link this with my job, my job is to make systems that don't learn. That is what we built this department around it, and I've always come back to that our most important thing here is to make a system that's not learning about how not to hurt patients learn. I've been I should knock on some kind of wood. I don't know how long this will last, but but they know what I've been up to, and they know, and I guess you're right. Whistleblowers usually don't fare so well. I'm not going to credit to any kind of smarts. I'm just going to credit. I really tried to do the right thing. I got definitely no financial benefit or career benefit or any other benefit, to say the least. Um, John,
Well,
although I've been accused of
thank
talking too
you.
much, John's comment, I mean, the things in John's quote about me when he says he doesn't have a lot of words, that meant a lot because that was, yeah, I've always wanted the people who really been through the stuff to get to be the ones to talk. And I use my word, a lot of words when I have to, but I like that he saw that. And I like that he saw what we did in Hawaii, where, I mean, he came to the workshop in Hawaii, yeah, where we started to get really smart people to talk about it. And came to the stuff in Congress where he got people to talk about it, and I guess that's my hope. I don't have a magic formula, but I guess I hope I don't get fired. But I would say, I decided it was worth the risk. I can't work at an institution that rapes its patients and doesn't learn from it and makes the same mistake again. So, to say the
Well,
least.
I said I
And all
was
this
going
other
to
stuff.
monopolize the questions as chairs, but I think this stuff is important enough. If anybody else has any other question or comment, please let's take the time.
Josh, like everybody else who has spoken today, I think you're very brave. And having been a college student at a university or college university when the woman president was having an affair with the one of the history professors, and her husband was unhappy, and
Oh,
the history professor's wife was unhappy, and it hit everything, and she lost her job.
oh wow.
Um, this happens a lot, and having
Oh, yeah.
been a faculty member at Stanford, notably after Francis Conley complained about the actions of one neurosurgeon,
Okay.
um, it happens. And it doesn't matter East Coast, West Coast, center of the
Yeah.
country, public or private, they happen. And it's horrific for the people who it happens to. And it's amazing to find somebody who stands up for them. So the person who stood up for the women at Stanford in part
Okay.
was Pete McCloskey, former congressman, and
I thought I knew
unfortunately
that name.
he is no longer alive. But
Okay.
he just said, I don't want any money. I'll be your lawyer. I'm standing up for you, and you will have justice. So there you go.
Beautiful. We need people
Yeah.
like that. Just do the right thing. I mean,
Yeah.
thank you and Carl for organizing this, where you bring people together who do that kind of stuff.
Well, I have to say, I've been totally impressed by every single talk, and I personally thank you and thank all the other speakers.
I am humbled to be with these other speakers. So thank you for inviting me.
All right. Well, thanks to all. With that, I'm going to um, close this session, stop the recording. For those who wish to watch, I will be playing maybe half of the Olivia Sagan recording because I'll cut out the middle to try to catch up on our schedule and get back on time. So I'll probably play the first 15-20 minutes and the last 15-20 minutes. So we're back on schedule to start our tech talks at 3 o'clock. But I'll be running the video for that for whoever wants to listen to that video play. Meanwhile, keep in mind that all of our recordings will eventually be on YouTube for download and viewing at a later date. Okay, thank you everybody. And our live talks will start up again at 3 p.m. California time. Thank you.